Welcome back to Behind the Photo, where we prize out interesting and unexpected stories from otherwise innocent-looking photographs. In this episode's photo hides behind it the fact that when I snapped it, I thought it would be the last photo I ever took alive. This dangerous tale is based in the unusual overlanding destination of Somaliland, a self-declared breakaway part of Somalia, well off any beaten traveller track, and where you're likely to end up much more than beaten if you venture. I calmly chose to go there, as I was on a 3-year drive around Africa, and after more than 2.5 years of battling constant challenges of all kinds and having somehow survived being electrocuted in the shower in Tanzania, I was literally battle-scarred and mentally tough as old boots, ready to find a way through anything, anywhere, anyone. Or so I thought. A more professional diagnosis might be that I was a little too reckless and suicidal in my risk assessment, given my recent brush with death and resulting nervous system damage. Either way, I was in Somaliland, and driving from the capital city where I'd had a nice time, across some beautiful mountains with a surprising amount of rain and cloud, and heading towards the border with the small country of Djibouti. It was all really quite interesting and wet and green and mountainous and, yeah, quite different. I wasn't expecting it. Upon emerging out of a mountain range, I found myself in a small town on an open plain, with what seemed like most of the town's people out next to a football field watching a game. All across Africa, football had proven to be a great way to meet local people over our common love of the game. From Morocco to Congo to Mozambique, I always stopped to watch any games going on, so I instinctively slowed down to see how people reacted to a strange foreign vehicle pulling up. And I have to admit, I always stopped with a faint, vain hope they might need another player so I could relive my glory days as a flying right winger on the cowpat-covered fields of rural New Zealand. They were all super excited in a polite and friendly way, quickly adopting me into the atmosphere and welcoming me to the village and the game. It was really fun to talk with everybody and learn a little about who they were and the region I was in. Especially after another day alone in the landy, in supposedly dark and super dangerous Somalia. As it was getting late in the afternoon and everybody was very welcoming, I thought about asking if I could camp on the football field after the game. And then, completely out of the blue, everything drastically changed. 70 meters away, 3 men came out of a building dressed very differently from everybody else, and with distinct beards that gave me instant flashbacks to dangerous encounters I'd had elsewhere in the world. My first gut reaction was, uh-oh, these guys are nutters. They made an immediate beeline for me, whilst pulling their daggers out of their belts and yelling menacingly in a language I didn't understand but didn't seem to be Somali as I knew it. The villagers all seemed horrified but clearly scared of these 3 men. However, they all quickly surrounded me to try and shield them away, and the main guy who'd been chatting with me took my arm and said, "You go now! You go! Go now! Go!" I made it back to the landy, fumbled the lock, jumped in, and drove off, whilst the villagers heroically continued to do their best to argue in my favour at a respectful distance from the 3 knife-wielding idiots. It was a truly horrible moment. Such a drastic change of atmosphere. Hard to fathom somebody wanted to kill you. What if the villagers had simply stepped aside? As I drove off, I could see 2 sedan cars were starting to follow me. Okay, great. Hunted down and killed by some nutters in Somalia. But at least quite a heroic and interesting way to go out for an intrepid traveller type, I thought, as I tried to speed off down the bumpy track into the fading light, fixating on my wing mirror to see if they were gaining on me. Finally, after one of the worst half an hours of my life, I seemed to have lost them, given the landy's superior ability across the very rough track and my slightly higher than normal speeds. I thought it was best to find somewhere safe to camp before it was completely dark. There was no moon and I'd have to drive with the lights on, else likely break something. So best to try and hide now in the fading light and leave again at 5 in the morning, I thought. So I pulled off into a dry riverbed, deliberately driving over huge bushes to try and hide my tyre tracks in the sand, knowing that's how they would follow me, and get as far away from the track as the rough terrain would allow. There was a large bush in an otherwise fairly open and exposed area, so I did my best to place the landy between it and the main track. I was definitely not totally hidden, but the best I could do before darkness ate the remaining light and left me stranded. I turned off the engine with my heart pumping and sat still in deadly silence and listened as best I could with my electrocution-damaged hearing for any approaching cars. Feeling hunted and not being able to hear your hunters approaching is quite nerve-wracking. I readied my machete and axe by my side. I double-checked if I was as well hidden as I could be behind the bush and tried to take some pictures, so in the event I was found dead and the camera was ever found, it would show where I'd been. My hands weren't as steady as they could have been when taking them. That's when and why I took this photo. Looking out of the landy door like this, part of my mind was oddly calm as I waited for death to find me. I'd only just managed to escape from it a few months earlier, but had a forced look at what came next, so I wasn't too afraid. Just nothing. I was determined to put up a good fight and give a good account of myself. If I was going to be a tiny article in the New Zealand Herald, I wanted it to say how I'd fought off numerous attackers before heroically succumbing to my wounds. If they had guns, it would be over in seconds. If they just had the daggers I'd seen, then I fancied my chances with my machete and axe. If they didn't all rush me at once. I chuckled to myself at one point. Odd thoughts to be having on a Monday night, eh? I wonder what normal people are watching on Netflix tonight. After about 20 minutes, I heard some distant brake squeals and a bit of engine noise. Given its direction, it seemed some cars were now crossing the riverbed I'd driven up. Silence. Maybe some talking. And then the hopeful relief of engines seemingly moving off. Was that them? Were they gone for good? As complete darkness engulfed me and the landy, my faithful companion through so many adventures, all I could do was sit and wait. An extremely long and tense night sitting in the driver's seat with my fingers near the ignition, hopeful of making a dramatic getaway if discovered. Well after midnight, I put the roof tent up, set my alarm for 5:30, and collapsed exhausted. The adrenaline had finally worn off, and I passed out immediately. 5:30 a.m. Blurry-eyed, fuzzy-headed, 2 shots of cold instant coffee, head underwater, keys in the ignition, let's get out of here. In the semi-darkness, I thought it was best to head back to the riverbed. No use charging around blindly on the open terrain, as I could just make out my tracks from the previous night. I nervously approached the main track, but couldn't see anybody around. Would I be able to make a clean escape today? I could see new tyre tracks over the top of mine. They had briefly turned up the riverbed to follow me, it seemed, but then reversed and continued down the main track. Why had they stopped if they'd seen my tyre tracks leading off? Perhaps it wasn't them. But who else would it be, stumbling around here in the Somali desert in the dark? I shuddered, shrugged, and figured I'd probably never know who it was, or why they hadn't followed my tracks as I drove off. That was until about 60 metres down the main track, when it suddenly became blindingly obvious what had happened. To the right of the main track, in the direction of the large bush I'd camped next to, was a sadly familiar sign in Somalia, and even though it was written in Somali, I knew what it said. Danger. Mines. I'd accidentally camped in a minefield, and it had saved me from being murdered by some nutters. They knew it was there, and they weren't willing to risk coming after me. Oh man, saved by danger, I chuckled to myself as I drove on, quite happy that I still had 4 wheels and 2 legs for whatever came next on this incredible journey.